Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Satanic Verses, the book that in many ways changed the course of literary history, but also changed Salman Rushdie's life, the author Salman Rushdie's life, can now be sold in India after 36 years. And you know the story. This happened without anybody intending to lift the ban. It's as if everybody pretended there was no ban because there was a case in court, somebody had gone to court against the ban, and government could not produce the ban order, or the customs department could not produce the ban order. This is a good way of saying that we are lifting the ban without saying it. So the book is now available. It's also available in one of Delhi's prominent shops, bookshops, Bari Sons. See this picture and also see the story that Antara Barua, our reporter, had done. And in fact, the story is headlined that this has broken the Khan market consensus. That's a little bit cheeky of us to say, but the fact is that when the book was banned, this was a very interesting period in India's political history. This was 1988, 1999. This is when Rajiv Gandhi was towards the last months or within the last year of his tenure, of his 5-year tenure. He had started with a very high majority, but then he had started losing popularity. By 1988, when the book came out towards the end of 1988, he was really very unpopular and looked like he was in desperate straits. Now, he had complicated his own life, and that is something that ultimately had far-reaching consequences for national politics. He had complicated his own life, that's why I say, by first changing the law to overturn that Shabano judgment. And then it led to another series of blunders after that. Because of that, he then went and opened the lock at Ayodhya, at the temple site, also then subsequently allowed Shilanyas, etc. That is the history that we know. However, it was in the process of making the same serial blunders that he also banned Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses. And how did it happen? How did it happen is a story that I need to tell you now, or that I want to tell you now. And I will tell you this story because I might have had, or maybe I did not have, some contribution to make there. Maybe I've been given credit for more than I deserve, but I do feature in that history in some ways, and I will take you through that. And when I do that, I will do some storytelling also, and this storytelling will take you to Pakistan in the summer of 1990. As I told you some time back, that occasionally I will use CutTheClutter to tell you some stories from my years as a reporter, and this is my way of vicariously also writing my memoir. So in fact, it's like speaking my memoir. Tomorrow I can compile it, and I had also said it when the last time I did one such episode. I had said that we will make it in the course of time only exclusive to our members on our YouTube channel. Members on our YouTube channel membership is very different from subscriptions on our website. Membership on our YouTube channel is much cheaper. We give you many benefits, including responding to all your questions and the points you raise, and also giving you products like these. And wherever possible, we make our videos available to you earlier than the rest. And in fact, going ahead, we'll make much more of that. So this video also will be available to our members much earlier than it will be available to all. So if you haven't taken a membership, please do. You will get a badge showing that you are a member, and then we'll be responding to you quickly whenever you write to us with praise, but even more so with criticism. That said, let me take you back to 1988. Now, 1988, August 1988, I got my first editorial designation. I used to then work for India Today magazine. 1st August 1988, I was promoted, designated as features editor of the magazine. The magazine had many senior editors, big dadas who were sitting on their real estate. So there was very little left for a new editor. So what was I given? I was given, besides my own writings, I was given sports, I love sport, as you know, and also books, because the magazine needed to develop a book section. So this is 1st of August. Now, within a few days of my taking over as featured editor, as we know the dates, Ziaul Haq was blown up in that C-130 over Bahawalpur. When that happened, I was immediately on the plane to Lahore and then on to Islamabad. So I was covering that story. It was a cover story then. Around time I came back, Madhu Jain, who was one of my colleagues, actually one of my much senior colleagues at that point, she used to also write about the nicer, finer side of life, that is films, literature, art, stuff like that. Formidable writer. She came with some excitement, the proof copy of a book. And she said, you know what? I've got a proof copy of Salman Rushdie's new book, Satanic Verses. And Arun Puri, then the editor, had told her that you must review it now before the others do it. So she said that she had called Salman Rushdie in London and he had given her the permission to write the review now. Fantastic, I said. I've just taken over the book section. Can it have a better beginning than the world exclusive review on Salman Rushdie's new book? Salman Rushdie and Madhu Jain had been friends for a very long time. As she writes later in an article that she wrote for Open Magazine in 2012, she also mentions that she and her husband had attended his wedding to his second wife in London, in Islington in London as well. So they were quite friendly. Now, this book review was done. It was published. The book review had some lines and some excerpts. Syed Shahabuddin, who was then a kind of part politician, but also activist in a way, a Muslim activist in a way, he was a former Indian Foreign Service officer, also a former ambassador. He read her review and the excerpts and immediately thought that the book was offensive to Islam, and he launched forth into an almighty protest. Everybody took the cue from him, and one thing led to the other. There were protests across India, and protests then spilled over across the border into Pakistan and in Bangladesh as well. In Pakistan, in Karachi, protests were particularly bad, and some people died in those protests also. It seems, in fact, it is widely believed, and I think it's true because I've read a lot of references in books and other writings, that Ayatollah Khomeini at that point, he watched some of these protests on television channels. And when he watched them on TV, obviously he checked out what's going on, and then he was told it's about this book. And that's when he issued this fatwa just as 1989 began, in February 1989, on Valentine's Day. That is when this fatwa was issued. After which, at India Today, we wrote a big cover story on this, which I anchored as editor. However, the reason I take you back to this story is that when Salman Rushdie wrote his autobiography under the name Joseph Anton, which was a name that he had adopted to survive, for survival in that period when there was a fatwa on him, and he had to be concerned about his safety. And as we know, subsequently, he was attacked with a knife and lost an eye. In that book, he said that it was this review by Madhu Jain that, quote unquote, lit the fire. Now, when he was coming into India to promote his book, Joseph Anton, that is when Madhu Jain wrote for Open Magazine. And I'm sharing that article with you. I'll share a link with you, and you will see some of it on your screen as well. And there she said, you can read the article, but I'm reading the relevant para for you. There she said, unfortunately, the editor of the books pages at that time, who later went on to edit a national daily, yours truly, she could have as well mentioned my name, he plucked some of the more volatile extracts from the novel and inserted them in the book review. Would I ever do this? Insert something in Madhu Jain's book review? Nevertheless, they were excerpts from the book carried. So those excerpts are a reality. And that, she said, Syed Shahabuddin read, and as he confessed later he had never read the book, he just read the review, and that lit the fire. So when Salman Rushdie said that the review lit the fire, Madhu Jain obviously got a bit upset and wrote this in defense of herself, saying that she didn't do it. It was this editor of the book section in India Today who picked out these excerpts. First of all, if I did such a thing, You might even say that this was good news sense, but the fact is I did not do it because I could not have done it, and I could not have done it for the simple reason that I simply don't have the software in my head or the patience to read magic realism. So my apologies to Salman Rushdie. There is no way, even if you put a gun on my head, I'll be able to read this book or wade through it and find any of these passages. In fact, another great writer of magic realism, who's somebody I admire a lot, Amitav Ghosh, he wrote his first book. It was Circle of Reason. It so happened that somewhere around mid-80s or maybe late 80s, 87 or thereabouts, I had to come back from Amritsar. This was Punjab, deeply caught in insurgency, militancy, terrorism. And that day I was on an assignment in Punjab, in Amritsar, and I had to come back to Delhi, come back home in a bit of a hurry. And those days there used to be only one flight. The flight was next afternoon. So I decided to take the train. It was called the Flying Mail, but remember, the Flying Mail is not such a fast train anyway. It doesn't fly very much. It stops at many places. But this was the era of militancy, bombs on rail tracks, terror attacks. So no train ran at more than 20 kilometers an hour in Punjab. So I was to get into this train. Everybody knew, and I knew, that the train will be empty. So how do you pass time? So I generally spread the word among journalists there. If anybody had a copy of a book I could read, or a book or a magazine, so somebody had a copy of Circle of Reason and gave it to me. Reason I'm telling you this involved story is because it's about magic realism and my lack of software or ability to wade through magic realism, or to have the patience, or I would say the intellect, to read it or fathom it. So I had that copy with me. It took the train about 9.5 to 10 hours from Amritsar to Ambala, about 250 kilometers. You can imagine how slow the train was, how slowly it was running. There was nobody else in the train. There was no other passenger. There were a lot of armed cops, and they would come and chat with you. The only thing I had for company with me was Circle of Reason. So I was reading and I was struggling with it, once again because of my own inadequacies. There was nothing to do. The train might have stopped in many places, many stations, but there was nothing on those stations. No chai samosa, no aloo puri, no shop was open, no kiosk was open, no magazines, no newspapers, nothing. It was Punjab of that period. It was Punjab under siege. So when the train made it to Ambala, almost 10 hours later, maybe a little more than 10 hours later, about 250 to 55 kilometers from Amritsar, seeing a railway station with shops open, with kiosks, with chai, samosa, the usual stuff, and a newspaper shop, the usual A.H. Wheeler shop that we were used to those days. That was the familiar sight. It was almost like liberation. So I jumped out of the train in glee. Now, jumping out is an exaggeration, but I'm only making the point that after about 10 years of being imprisoned in a lonely train with nobody to see people, to see shops, what a big relief. And what did I do? I went straight to the bookshop, the newspaper shop, and bought 3 copies of 3 different issues, 3 months of Filmi Kaliyan. That used to be a famous Hindi film magazine. So I thought at least now this will help me travel between Ambala to Delhi, which might take another 3 hours or 3.5 hours, because now the train was back to almost its normal speed. Now, how much of the book had I read by that time? In about 10 hours, I had reached 201st page in the book. How many pages was the book? I think it was almost exactly 402. So I was not even halfway through the book. So I tell you this involved story to tell me that it was impossible for me, it would have been impossible for me to go through that book by Salman Rushdie, because some of his subsequent books are not magic realism. That book by Salman Rushdie would have been impossible for me to wade through it and to find these excerpts. However, what was done was done. It was good news sense. It was also entirely factual. And if Madhu Jain later wrote this for Open Magazine and thinking that this will help her make amends with Salman Rushdie, that didn't quite work out, because in that article she said that she lost a good friend forever because of that review. How do I know this? Because Salman Rushdie came to India at that time, around time this article came out. He came to India to promote his book. I was invited to host him on Walk the Talk. I met him before recording the interview. We had lunch together, and that's where this conversation also came up. And he said, don't even think about it. I know what has happened. It doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and talk. And we recorded that Walk the Talk interview. So there were no hard feelings, no grudge. Definitely, he did not hold me responsible for this. And this also came up in our conversation. So I tell you this long, involved story only to make the point that as journalists, sometimes without realizing, we are becoming part of some history. Sometimes it's good history, but mostly it's not very good history, unfortunately, particularly for people like me who've covered trouble all their lives. And in this case, this came about when I had not had my editorial designation as features editor or also books editor, not even for 31 days, because it came on August 1, 1988. If this was published in the September 15 issue of the magazine, which means the issue must have gone to bed around 25th or 26th of August that year. So that's the kind of brush with history sometimes we journalists can have. That's the reason I thought this was a good story to tell you now when the ban on the book has been lifted and the book is out. That said, I have to take you to one more story. I have to jump a few months after this. I told you the ban on Salman Rushdie's book came on Valentine's Day, 1989. I take you to the summer of 1990, about a year later, summer of 1990 in Karachi. I was in Karachi. That was a time when India and Pakistan, one of those many occasions, it looked like we were going to war like yesterday. That's when Benazir Bhutto had gone to Muzaffarabad and she had said, "Hum Jagmohan ko jag jag, mo mo, han kar denge." So all that stuff was going on, and Pakistan had sent a nuclear warning to India that we'll start the war with a nuclear attack, etc. All of those things are documented. So at that time, I was in Pakistan covering this situation. So in Karachi, I found these big hoardings. These big hoardings of a film called International Gorillay. The hoarding said Gorillay, Gorillay, although the film's name was International Gorillas. So I asked friends of mine, what is this film? And I see some people with guns and somebody on these hoardings who looks like Salman Rushdie. So as we checked out with local journalists, we figured out that this was a film somebody had made featuring Pakistan's topmost stars at that point on Salman Rushdie, on how these Islamic guerrillas, the Pakistani Islamic guerrillas had gotten together to go and take revenge on Salman Rushdie. Now, we decided to go and watch this film, and I came back and I did write a story about it. That is the film show I want to tell you about now. I'm also sharing with you a link to the film. The film is now available on YouTube. You can watch it. This was a controversial film on Islam's revenge on Salman Rushdie, produced as most Pakistani films were those days in Lahore, and released just around that time, just around May or June of 1990. And by the way, all of this plotting and planning to go out and kill Salman Rushdie was taking place, I thought at that moment, in a city where Salman Rushdie's mom was living then. The British had refused to air it on their ethnic channels, and this had led to protests in Bradford, protests by Muslims in Bradford and other areas where there is a large concentration of Muslims, particularly subcontinental Muslims in Britain. The star cast of the film, if you know anything about Pakistan cinema, then among the biggest stars for a long time were Babra Sharif, Neeli and Javed Sheikh. All three were there in that film. The film actually opened with a meeting of thugs and crooks, etc., with wine glasses, whiskey glasses, clinking, and the chief of the thugs, the chief of the villains, was basically saying awful things about Islam or rude things about Islam. It's hundreds of millions of followers. And he said that Islam is threatening Zionists. Once again, this crook was painted as a Zionist, Jewish. In that setting, walks in a person, a villainous person who looks a bit like Salman Rushdie. In fact, the joke in Karachi was that this guy looks better than Salman Rushdie. Right? He walks in, his spectacles resting on the bridge of his prominent nose, and he says, "Kya Islam hai? Islam ko main khatam kar dunga abhi jaake." He's saying, this is the actor playing Salman Rushdie, who's saying, "Kya Islam hai? Islam ko main khatam kar dunga jaake." Aur theek hai, mere ko जान को खतरा होगा, there will be threat to my life, And of course, in the film, of course, the risk in the film was being called a kutta or a dog in the entire film. The answer to the supposedly evil guy carrying out this task for Zionists to destroy Islam was a deputy superintendent of Karachi police who had two tough brothers-in-law, one of them played by Javed Sheikh, at that point the great Pakistani star, a bit like Shah Rukh Khan might be today, or maybe at that time Amitabh Bachchan was. The traitor within the police ranks. The police ranks also had a traitor. That was a DIG who also was taking money from foreign agencies. The only good thing about the DIG was his stunning sister, Neeli, also a police inspector. Then the scene shifts to a protest on Rushdie's book. Neeli and the DSP, that is the father, they resign and join the protests. The DIG then, the bad guy who's also a foreign agent, he fires killing the DSP's two teenage children. Tum marna nahi. Javed Sheikh screams, don't die, bending over his niece who's got blood coming out of her body. But she says, no chacha, मैं अब जिंदा नहीं रहूंगी, I will not live. But वो कुत्ता सलमान रुश्दी को जरूर मार देना. That dog Salman Rushdie must die. Then the scene shifts to the DSP's home and his wife is now bent over the prayer rug, making just one prayer to God, which is death to Salman Rushdie. Then the operation begins. DSP, that is Javed Sheikh, and his brothers-in-law, they raid the house of the DIG who had ordered opening of the fire on the protest. The honor of shooting the DIG goes to who? It goes to his sister, the police inspector Neeli. Now the stage is set for that hunt for Rushdie. This takes us to some tropical island. The indication in the film is it's somewhere in the Philippines because everybody gets down from an Air Philippines jet. This island, it looks like, is entirely owned by this filmy Salman Rushdie. This has a huge house, the kind of house that villains would often have in Hindi cinema or subcontinental cinema. And that house has its own helipad and it's protected by what looks like maybe several companies of commandos. He even has a sheikh from Dubai. It's obviously a renegade sheikh from Dubai who's bringing him loads of arms. So they find traitors and renegades everywhere in this film because it's a conspiracy theory. His security detail, who are all commandos, fancily dressed and fancily kitted out, they have caught an entire lot of Islamic guerrillas from all over the world who've dared to come to kill Rushdie. So they've all been called, they've all been lined up. Then Rushdie comes there with an evil smile on his face. He stands there again smiling devilishly, orders some of these guerrillas sent to assassinate him to be hanged from palm trees ringing the island. The others from across the world get his very delicate personal attention. He picks up his sword and chops their necks one by one. Once the job is done, he wipes his sword with a towel, holds it close to his nose, and deep breath of satisfaction. Now he addresses his accomplice, and his accomplice is none else than a Captain JC. JC, by the way, is for Jesus Christ. He says, I did such a wonderful thing. मैंने इतनी अक्लमंदी की बात की कि मैंने तुम्हारे को यहूदियों की फौज से भर्ती किया. That I recruited you from the army of the Jews. हाँ, लेकिन ये बताओ कि तुम्हारा क्या जादू है कि तुम सब ये इस्लामी गुरिल्ला जो आते हैं इनको इतनी आसानी से पकड़ लेते हो. So tell me what magic do you have that you can find out, you can ferret out all these undercover Islamic assassins who've come to kill me. Captain JC बोलता है, साहब मेरे पास ना एक जबरदस्त आंखें हैं. I have a wonderful pair of eyes. एक्सरे से भी तेज है, sharper than X-rays. ये बिल्कुल अगर 1000 लोग भी होंगे, even if there's a crowd of thousands or maybe lakhs, they can identify an Islamic guerrilla out of that. रुश्दी बोलता है मुझे आंखें तो दिखा दो. He wants to see the eyes. तब क्या होता है? Boom! Lightning comes. Then drums sound. Camera zeroes in on a sizable butt, if I may say so. Then an ample bosom, right? And an excited shout goes up in Nashaman Cinema Theatre in Karachi. Babra Sharif. the audience says, even before the face comes on the screen, because they're sitting there in anticipation, and she was the big dancing star at that point. Immediately, Babra Sharif breaks into a dance, proper raunchy cabaret style dance, in the course of which she changes her dress several times, very typical of subcontinental films, particularly of that era. वो फिर कपड़े चेंज करती है. She changes her dress again. This time she is wearing the blue-gray uniform of a Filipino policewoman at Manila airport. At immigration counter, her eyes look very carefully, very penetratingly at anybody coming in. So DSP or brothers-in-law, दो आदमी जा रहे हैं ना, DSP and brothers-in-law, they have taken it upon themselves to go and kill Salman Rushdie in his hideout. They can't escape her also. The बाकी film जो है, the rest of the film is just motorcycle and car chases and automatic gunfire as Captain JC's, that is Captain Jesus Christ's quote-unquote soldiers. They fight with these Islamic guerrillas who only keep getting the better of them, because one, they are Islamic guerrillas, they've been blessed by God, and second, they are Pakistani, and they are Pakistani, not ordinary Pakistanis, but Pakistan's top stars. Very often when they are in trouble, they reach out to God Almighty, and God Almighty does pull them out of really difficult spots also, but finally they are caught and they are brought to the island. And then you think, now they are brought to the island, now this evil Salman Rushdie, filmy Salman Rushdie will sort them out. But anyway, if you're watching a film, you know ultimately the good guys will win. You might have thought that he will again pull out the sword and cut them into pieces or chop their heads. But in this case, because these guys have been seen to be particularly persistent, looks like Salman Rushdie has a different approach. So he chooses torture, electric shocks, all of that you watch, all of that happens. And now it looks like that even God cannot help these people, because they are in such dire straits. And you can hear, and I remember hearing in the hall people sighing and saying, oh, so this will also end in a tragedy. But these people were great heroes. They are dying for a great cause. But you know what? It's a movie. It's a subcontinental movie. Such a thing cannot happen. So just when the audience has given up also, copies of the holy book appear from all corners of the room and send out what looks like lasers that electrocute or that burn Salman Rushdie. And all I remember from that moment is not even the background music or what anybody is saying on the screen, but the cheering from the crowd in the cinema hall. And then I thought, in fact, a thought passed my mind that this is happening in a city where Salman Rushdie's mom then lived. I thought now that Salman Rushdie's book can be sold in India. It's available in bookshops. It's a big positive thing to happen in India, because no books should be banned. No book should be banned of any kind. So this is out. It was a good time to tell you this story. One, because it's such an interesting story, but second, also to tell you how demonologies can be built around books and ideas and mere book reviews that nobody has even cared to read. Because if they cared to read, they perhaps would not have this view. And the fact is that a vast majority of them, like me, would not even have the wherewithal or software to read a book as interesting and important, but as complex as that, because magic realism is not for everybody.